I want to start by showing you a couple videos to kind of set the stage. These are two recent stories that came out of the news. The first one is a medical doctor from Australia who lost her position because of her unwillingness to stand behind what's called the affirmation model, which is an approach to gender identity that has been widely adopted and has become the standard and norm in the United States. And so I want to give you a sense of what this looks like in real time. So just watch this.
In simple terms, why were you stood down from your clinical duties at the hospital?
The hospital took the opportunity to remove me from clinical duties on the grounds of being a danger to trans and gender diverse children. Because I've got a history of expressing concerns about the gender clinic in the hospital and the model they're using called the affirmation model.
This affirmation model, can I paraphrase that? Tell me if it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So if a child comes in and presents with gender dysphoria, regardless of the mental state of that child, the hospital and the gender clinic just goes along with what the child wants.
Yes.
So the hospital just expected you, directed you in fact.
Directed me.
If a child was presenting with gender dysphoria, you were, no questions asked really, send them straight to the gender clinic.
Yes.
Forgive me if this is a stupid question, but how do you know if you were sending the right kids on what is an irreversible journey?
No one can know, and that's really important for parents to know, because when a child with gender dysphoria sits in front of a child psychiatrist or any mental health clinician, they have no way of knowing whether these children are going to persist in their gender dysphoria. And what's been hidden are the thousands of parents across Australia who are in anguish because they're very concerned about their child receiving care according to this affirmation model, and they're in a very difficult position, and they often can't speak out because their highest priority is to remain close to their child and to try to protect their child.
But if they keep going, they go to the gender clinics and then they start to have body parts cut off, they're never going to recover.
It's an absolute disaster, and it's so sad because child psychiatrists and other mental health clinicians are keeping quiet about their concerns. So it is creating this false impression that we all agree with the affirmation model.
It's not just out there in Australia. In fact, the United States is leading the way now in the world. If you take a look at Britain and Europe, in many cases, countries that were ahead of us on attempting to treat gender dysphoria by telling a little boy that, no, you really are a little girl. Let's give you hormones or let's give you surgery to make your body line up with how you feel about yourself. Insofar as hormones or surgery can do that, they actually went down the road on these things, and they've actually come back and said, we're going to stop doing these things. We're going to stop doing these radical surgeries. We're going to stop doing this hormone treatment, and we're actually going to treat some of the underlying issue. That's what Britain and Europe have done recently. But the United States actually is full steam ahead. And in fact, laws that have been passed in the United States and certain states to slow down this headlong rush to give people lifelong treatments and to medicalize what is, in many cases, just a psychological condition that many kids grow out of. Those laws that have been passed to protect children have been characterized by our president, our current president, as hateful, as bigoted, and as dangerous. And in fact, just recently in California, legislation made its way through the House. I believe I just saw a news story last night, I believe this happened yesterday, that the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, actually vetoed the law. I think that was an entirely political move. I'll give you reasons for that some other time off class. But I want to give you a sense of what people want to do who are part of this movement. So just watch this.
This story is getting a lot of attention. This is not an exaggeration. There is a new bill moving through the California State House that could see parents lose custody of their child if they refuse to acknowledge their child's chosen gender. The bill would give judges the right to consider a parent's rejection or non-affirmation of their child's gender as child abuse or child neglect. Supporters say it's in the child's best interest. Opponents say it's government overreach into family matters. We want to welcome first the Executive Director of Trans Family Support Services, Kathy Molig. Thank you, Kathy, for being with us. This is such an important and sensitive issue. I know you co-sponsored this bill. The author has a transgender child. You as well have a transgender child. Why was this amendment brought forth?
Well, I want to say that this is just adding to already existing family law about the things that judges have to keep in mind when they are looking at custody and visitation. Very much like looking at if there's drug or alcohol abuse, has there been a history of physical violence in the home with this parent? That it's just adding that as a consideration. It does not deem it abuse.
Okay, well, that's good to have that clarity. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are not fans of or supporters of this, even though it hasn't been codified into law yet, because they're concerned. They're concerned that, you have a child who at age, say, 8 or 10 would say, I want to be a boy when they were born, or their gender at birth assigned was a girl. As they get older, they transform, they evolve. They don't necessarily want to be a boy anymore. It's not the case with about 0.6% of children in this country, like your own, like Ms. Wilson's, Assemblymember Wilson's. Has that been brought into the conversation at all? That there's a spectrum whereby which children evolve or change their thoughts about gender and identity?
So everybody has this evolving and changing and maturity, right, that we go through. But when there is a child who is asserting their gender identity outside of their sex assigned at birth, that's something to not be taken lightly and to not push aside. And with most of our gender diverse children, all we're talking about is changing names and pronouns and maybe their clothing or their haircuts. We're not talking about anything else. And this bill in specific is just saying that the judge needs to take into consideration that all the research has proven that the best treatment and the best care for our kids is to affirm their identities.
So almost everything you heard that representative saying is a lie. It's not in accordance with actual facts, statistical facts. It's not actually in accordance with what their actual intent was. Notice she didn't say that kids won't be taken. They said in most cases, right? So what we see, and what I want to really begin this class by starting with, is just kind of what is our focus right now. Because anytime you jump into this, and I would encourage you to read the preface of your handout, not right now. We don't have time for you to do that. But when you get a chance to read it, I want to just acknowledge up front that whenever you talk about issues of gender identity and human sexuality, you're dealing with things that are philosophical, things that are historical, things that are psychological, things that are theological, and things that are deeply personal. Amen? Mm-hmm. So like everybody sitting here, I can look around the room. I know there are a lot of different ways that we're going to approach this. I want to be really clear what we're focused on. What we're focused on right now is the actual campaign, a social campaign to redefine the approach to gender and sexuality. And the reason we're doing that is because we as Christians and citizens, we need to be aware of something that's happening and that it's actually sweeping across our country. So we could talk about these things in a very pastoral way, like what do you do if someone comes to you and they're struggling with gender identity? That's an important thing. We probably should do a class on that at some point. Right now what we're talking about, we're focused on what I would call the movement. And I just want to encourage you, if you have your handouts right now, we're on page 5 of your handout. And I want to just begin by defining what I mean when I talk about the movement. And you'll see that there are blanks you can fill in. Hopefully you got a pen when you grab your stuff. But let me just define the movement for you that we're talking about. The movement, the LGBTQ plus movement, is a revolutionary campaign to redefine historic understandings of gender and sexuality, capture social systems, and silence opposing viewpoints. A revolutionary campaign to redefine historic understandings of gender and sexuality, capture social systems, and silence opposing viewpoints. So let me just break that down briefly. First of all, it's a campaign. It's a campaign to redefine historic understandings. The Cambridge Dictionary defines a campaign as a planned group of especially political, business, or military activities that are intended to achieve a particular aim. The campaign that we're talking about has actually been in action since the early 20th century. I'm not going to give you a whole historical overview this morning, But you can go back to the early 20th century and begin seeing some of this activity. It ramped up massively, and I laid out the history of this stuff in places like my book, Compassion Without Compromise. It ramped up significantly in the 50s and 60s, and it's carried over into today. So what feels like a very quick development has actually been a century-long step, and we're going to explore some of that today. So it's a campaign. That's what we're focused on. There are many good people who are kind of just going along with what they're hearing, and so I'm not trying to categorize those people. I'm not trying to categorize your friend who just says, aren't we supposed to love everybody? I'm talking about the actual campaign, the organized campaign to redefine historic understandings of gender and sexuality. One of the features of this campaign is a radical separation between our sex, male-female, defined by chromosomes, and gender, which is what they say is how we present ourselves to the world. So a perfect example, you've got a quote there, right there in your book. Gender identity is how a person feels. Now this is from a website designed for teens, and it gives a highly colored view of what gender is as they define it. Gender identity is how a person feels and who they know themselves to be when it comes to their gender. There are more than two genders, even though in our society, and usually is based on someone's anatomy. There are more than two genders. The genders are most recognized are male and female, called the gender binary. So we're getting down to the root. This movement is an attempt to erase what is known as, quote unquote, the gender binary, male, female, kind of like Genesis chapter 1, right? Okay, so we're going to the fundamentals of creation, usually based on someone's anatomy, the genitals they're born with. This is gender assignment and is based on an assumption that someone's genitals match their gender. I wonder why anybody would think that. However, gender isn't about someone's anatomy. Now, this is where you get into what is a genuine religious conviction, an alternate religion that is being affirmed by this campaign. Gender isn't about someone's anatomy. It's about who they know themselves to be. There are many different gender identities, including male, female, transgender, gender neutral, non-binary, agender, pangender, genderqueer, two-spirit, third gender, and none of or all a combination of these. There are many more gender identities than we've listed. Gender can be complex, and people are defining themselves in new and different ways as we gain a deeper understanding of identities. And if you look at your handout, pages 6 and 7 and 8, I'm not going to read those. And those are just 20 of, some people would say, more than 100 forms of gender identity. This is rooted deeply in philosophy. It's been being taught in universities since the late 60s, early 70s, and it's connected to a whole lot of things that we can't even begin to scratch the surface on. But I'm trying to give you guys the exact target of what I'm shooting for. I'm shooting for the campaign to redefine gender and sexuality, and it's a campaign to capture social systems. This is critical. If we want to understand why it's important for us to be aware of these things, because this campaign to redefine gender and sexuality is not simply being carried out on university campuses anymore. It's being carried out to capture social systems. So core social systems like government, the way that government legislates and approaches things. You just heard that video where literally in a custody battle between two parents, legislators in California want to make sure that a parent who doesn't affirm a child's gender transition from male to female or female to male, that parent will lose custody of their children. And we already have parents in America who have lost custody of children on that basis. So government, the courts, schools, as you're going to see this week and especially next week, this is a massive campaign that is affecting children in schools right now. Court systems, businesses. You're going to hear from somebody in our church next week who in their workplace came face to face with this issue. Social services, etc. And most importantly, the most important social system that's being erased and redefined is family, which is, we're going to see how the enemy tends to work. Family was God's first big invention. And is it any wonder that's the first thing that Satan wants to undermine? And then silence viewpoints. So why are we doing this? I think the truth is that we've gotten here because far too few people are alert to what's going on, and far too few people care about it. I preached my first sermon on the issue of same-sex marriage in the year 2000, or it might have been 2001. And I remember how crazy people thought it was to even think that might be a possibility in America. But the reason that the Lord put a burden on my heart for this is because I went to a Christian school called Hope College. And in this Christian school that to this day, many Christian parents think they're going to send their kids to this school to be trained and educated and learn the Bible. The chair of my religion department, who was also my advisor, in 1994 was an advocate for same-sex marriage. The dean of the chapel, who led a massive revival on that school's campus, came under severe attack, not from non-Christians, but from supposedly Christian members of the faculty, because he took a biblical stance on the issue of human sexuality. So why do I care about this? Because I began to see in 1994, 95, 96, that this was going to be an issue that fundamentally divides the church. That's why I began speaking up about it. My awareness of this issue was probably a little bit ahead of the curve, but I believe that we're all living with this as a reality right now, and now none of us can avoid it. And so I want to just real quickly, before I break you guys into your first group time, I want to talk about what I call the proximity passion scale. Here's what I'm getting at. You can kind of see how this works. From 0 to 10, from 0 to 10. There's a relationship between passion and proximity. By proximity, I mean an understanding and a true compassion for people. Like, how close are you to people who struggle with these issues? Or how personally does this issue affect you? How many of you know if you're sending your kids to a public school right now, you have proximity to this issue, whether you want to or not? If you have a family member or a loved one who's been captured by this, you probably have a little bit of proximity to this issue. Passion, when I talk about passion, I'm talking about grasping the importance and the practical relevance of the issue. In other words, you're passionate about standing on the truth of this issue. And I think all of us at some level, we might have a lot of proximity or a lot of passion, and the goal is that we have a lot of both, right? And so I just want to give you a sense, and I'm giving you this as a simple tool so you can say, where am I when it comes to these issues? So imagine there's someone who has very low proximity and very little passion. So they're not aware of this issue, and they don't really think they don't actually want to know about it, which I would say characterizes most Christians right now, right? Like a lot of Christians. I know people who I love dearly who don't want to hear it when I start talking about this stuff. They're like, why do you have to talk about this? Right? Like, so little proximity, little passion. Why does this matter? It's just something out there. And I would call you, if you're stuck there, you're an ostrich. You know? What does the ostrich want to do? Like bury its head in the sand, right? But then you have people who deeply care, right? Or who have friends or family, or they have some awareness of this sort of thing, and they're just one of these people who but doesn't want to get into any arguments about it. It's kind of like the nice little. Anybody ever seen videos of pandas? How many of you know that they have almost no sense of survival? I just recently watched a video that pandas are highly injury prone. Like, they just sort of like the world is a nice friendly place, and they end up falling off tree branches and getting hurt and getting injured because they're not actually aware enough to be vigilant, right? And so you've got Christians right now who are just like, I just want to be friends with everybody. I don't see why this ever needs to come up as a topic of conversation. This isn't my thing. God's called me to be a lover, not a fighter. Anybody in the room like that this morning? You don't have to raise your hands. I know you're here. It's not a big deal. I think you're a little bit of a panda. Then you've got people who I would say are a little bit like a pit bull. They have a lot of strong opinions, but they don't really understand the personal nature of these things. That this actually is going to have an impact on people's real lives. And that this is important for their approach to the world and their approach to other people. And what I would say is what we want to do is we want to have proximity in the sense of, I mean, if it's personal relationships, that's really good. But at the very least, a proximity of understanding. Understanding that this is real, that there are real people involved in this, that we need to love people whether they understand and agree with us or they don't, and that we need to be aware of that. In other words, the proximity of compassion and understanding of people. But we also need to be passionate about truth. And I call that your sheepdog, right? I mean, the sheepdog is not there to bite the sheep. It's there to make sure that they don't fall into a river and die, or they don't get attacked by wolves. And I think ideally, as a Christian, that's where we want to fit. So I want to ask you a question. Don't answer me right now, but where do you fit right now? Are you a ostrich? Have you been burying your head in the sand and saying, this is too weird, I don't want to talk about this? Are you a panda? You know, just, oh, this really isn't dangerous, let's just love everybody. Are you a pit bull? Are you like one of those like truth type people? Or are you a sheepdog? Do you have a sense like this matters because it matters to people, people matter to God, and the truth matters on this? So I want to just close out this first section. We're a little out of behind time here by giving you 5 reasons why I think this should matter to you. 5 reasons this should matter to you. First of all, because missionaries need to understand the mission field. Everyone say, I am a missionary. For too long in America, the church has viewed itself as a steward of culture in the sense that, well, this is a Christian nation. We've forgotten that this is a nation that's a mission field just like every other place. We as Christians were called to view our culture through a missionary lens. And a missionary needs to understand that while they are in this culture, they are not of this culture. They need to understand that they are called to be bridge builders. And just like a missionary needs to go over to another nation and understand, okay, how do I need to bring the gospel to this place? It's not just a matter of bringing something to it, it's understanding who you're ministering to. And if you don't understand the radical difference, especially generationally, between the way our culture views issues of gender and sexuality and the way the Bible does, you're already lost when it comes to actual conversations with people. I'll explain that more later. Secondly, families need to provide refuge and equipped, resilient missionaries. Your family you're going to have to understand the need that you have as family, as parents especially, that you're going to have to be ready to start equipping your children. Not just to discuss the particulars of this issue, but what are the areas of truth that I need to fortify in my kids so they're not going to become captured by this crazy, dangerous, destructive philosophy. I've actually sat down and had meals with parents whose kid, during COVID, scrolling through TikTok, came to redefine their own gender and announced it to their parents as an accomplished fact. Good kid, loved Jesus, went to church, went to youth group, got confused, was vulnerable. It's not going to be enough for you to love your kids. You're going to have to fortify your kids in truth and identity. One of the things we talk about a lot here, our identity. Citizens need to pull levers. As Christians, we need to understand that our faith is political. Whoops! The pastor just got in trouble. Somehow, well, I can tell you how. In the 1960s, the church bought into the idea that somehow faith is private and politics is public, and we can't talk about politics in the church. This issue is way bigger than politics, but it's going to impact politics. There are going to be people passing laws who get elected who are going to make a difference in how schools approach this issue, how psychologists approach this issue, whether they pass laws that so-called anti-conversion therapy laws, for instance, which say that a pastor can't talk to somebody who has struggles with gender or identity and help them become at peace with their own gender. There are people who want to make that illegal in our country. Okay, so politics matter, and as citizens, we need to be ready to pull the voting levers, is what I'm talking about. Where we have levers of power, where we have levers of influence, we want to be able to exercise those things outside of politics. Fourth, people with truth and love are called to show true love. That's something, again, that I develop in this book. I have a chapter on what is true love. And it kind of gets at that whole idea: are you being a panda, or are you being a pit bull? Are you being an ostrich, or are you being a sheepdog? Like, what does it really mean to show true love? If a doctor doesn't want to give somebody a bad diagnosis because it might mean radical invasive surgery, so they just tell the person you're okay and hands them some placebo pills to take with them. How do you know that doctor is not really showing love? You got to be willing to speak the truth. And finally, we must be willing to speak to the moment we're in. I have frequently regretted the time period that I was born in. I'm just being really honest with you. I've often been like, Lord, why in the world did you choose this topic to be a topic that I had to write a book about? Can I be honest with you? I really do. That's how I feel. I'm like, I wish I didn't have to do this. This stinks. You can talk to my wife. She'll affirm. Isn't that true, sweetie? I mean, like, why is this my topic? I don't want to be known as the guy who talks about this stuff. But how many of you know if that's the stuff that's actually having a massive impact on your culture and you don't speak to it, you're betraying the gospel. Because there is another gospel that's being preached in our culture right now. And so as God's people, we don't have the luxury to pretend this isn't happening. We don't have the luxury to pretend that this doesn't matter and that this isn't intimately related to our Christian faith. All right, here's what I want to do. I want to get you guys right now to do some talking yourselves.